Hi folks. Well, I had said during the last video that the next thing that we were going to do was to tear the front panel off and get into the boards behind it. I'd forgotten I got in some filter capacitors to put in here. Now if you recall, I think from the first video I talked about how critical it was to get capacitors that was close to the same size as possible. And I was having a tough time finding them. But I finally found some that were the right diameter, looked good height-wise. Lead spacings were not exact, but close enough to where I should be able to make them work. But if you look at this picture, I didn't know they were going to come with this threaded piece on the bottom. So what I've had to do is saw those off, and I'll show those to you. These are the capacitors, and I had to saw the bottoms off to get this out. So they should be okay. I filed these down. They're pretty smooth, but we're going to have to pull the driver supply board, and I showed you that before. We're going to take it apart again, and I'll show you why this is such a critical or tricky part to get right. So the problem comes in that these screws actually have to line up with the capacitors. So I'm going to pull this board out, then I'm going to pull a pair of the caps out, and I'll show you what's going on there. Okay, so with the board, all the screws taken out and the wires off, you can see how we have to make sure that everything fits in here. And I'm not sure if you can quite see in there, but this screw has to line up. This screw, this screw, this screw, that screw, and that screw. So they're clamped together in pairs, so we have to make sure that we get the polarities correct, and it looks like all the polarities are oriented the same way. Negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, positive. So I'm going to pull a pair of those out, and we'll take a look at it and see just how close we're going to be able to get this. Okay, so this is what we're dealing with. The capacitors are put in pairs, and then on the bottom we have to make sure that we get these spaced exactly right. It's going to be a bit of a bear, but I think we can do it. Anyhow, I'm going to start taking these out of here, and I'm going to take some measurements first to make sure that I get these back in right. Okay, so I've taken the old capacitors out, and I took the center bracket off, and I had to drill out the holes in these a little larger because these new capacitors have screws that are significantly larger than what came with these caps. So that necessitated drilling these out just a little bit, and I thought I'd take the opportunity to clean it up as well. So now we're also going to have to bend this piece in a little bit, because while these were good, as you can see right here, the new ones are a little bit off, if you can see right down in here. So we are going to have to bend this piece in a little bit, kind of like this, in order to accommodate the different spacing of these capacitors. Now, if you look at this one here, we can see they have a lead spacing that is roughly about 15. These have a lead spacing that are closer to 20, and we're going to have to make some modifications. So we're going to bend this in a little bit, basically like this, so that we can accommodate these. And that little bit of bend shouldn't make any difference. The main thing is that this has to make contact with the bottom of the circuit board, and it's roughly 32 millimeters. I measured it out before I disconnected it. It was about 32.17. So we're right about here. That's roughly the distance we have to get between, sorry, knock the camera, between here and the mounting piece that we're going to be putting in to here. So let me get this mounted and we'll see how close we're going to get. Okay, so basically all we're doing here is just drilling out the hole so to accommodate the screws that came with the new capacitors. Okay, so as you can see here, the one on the left is a little larger now, so I just have to do that to the other one. I already did the coupling one that goes between them. Then we have to do the other pair of caps. Okay, so I've got all the mounting brackets here. Now, this is going to have to be fitted, so these are exactly right. We're going to have to move these in and out. Also, the capacitors are going to have to be moved in the brackets because they have to stick just the right amount through the board when we mount them. So I haven't really got anything tightened, but I measured the distances here, and we need to be more like this. So these are going to have to be moved in, and this should be, we should be able to accommodate it. So I think we're going to be okay here. Bit more of an acute angle, but nobody's going to see it. It just has to fit and fit just right. Again, I'm not going to tighten these real tight because we're going to have to play with this quite a bit to get it right. Incidentally, let me show you why I'm replacing these. Some people don't replace the filter capacitors, and they are the last ones to go because what happens to capacitors, electrolytics in general, is they tend to dry out with age, and these have quite a bit of electrolyte in them. However, I'll show you what they look like on the LCR meter, and you'll see why we're replacing them. Okay, so these capacitors rated at 10,000 microfarads. This meter will read out in millifarads once you get over 999, I believe. So this is supposed to be 10,000. Let's see what we get. All right, those are about 4,800 microfarads. Okay, the new ones, oh, and just to make it interesting, even though everybody else in the industry marks the negative terminals, they had to mark the positive. Okay, so if we look at the new ones, much better. The other old one I have taken out. About the same. So they've lost about half their value. ESR is not bad, but replacing these should provide quite a bit more filtering. Okay, so I got two of these mounted now, and as you can see, they're just slightly taller than the other ones. They sit below the cover, but something else about these capacitors I need to point out is that these cans, or this part, is electrically connected to the negative terminal. So I'm probably going to have to insulate these with something, because if that cover bent in, we could have a problem. We're going to turn it around so you can see the bottom. We'll see if we're going to be able to get the board back on. Okay, so here's a view of the bottom. These are the capacitors I just put in. I didn't realize until I actually went to seat them that the perimeter of the capacitor actually contacts the base of the chassis, which actually makes part of this at least easier, because all you have to do is put these in and slide the bracket down until it touches, and then you can take it out and tighten it back up. So if we put our board in, I can't believe it, these holes almost perfectly lined up. Just gonna have to move, I think, this one a little bit, but I believe the other ones are going to be okay. Now, the one thing I didn't think about, because thinking ahead is just not my thing, is will these screws go through the board? I think they will, because they made these Okay, guess what? These are going to have to be drilled out as well. Not a big deal. We'll just take them over to the drill press and round these out a little bit. And you know, I think I'm going to flow some solder over these pads. Then when we put the caps in, it'll compress down and make a nice, good, tight connection. So, back to the drawing board. Okay, so I was able to take this over to the drill press and enlarge the holes without necessitating a trip to the emergency room, which is quite unusual. Truth be told, I'm kind of a klutz and I shouldn't be allowed around power tools. So anyhow, I think we're going to be good here. I may have to make some minor adjustments, but these should seat. And once I get this put where, let me see. Oh yeah, you know, we're going to be good. Just a minor adjustment of this one, I think it will be okay. But I'll get this done, put the other ones in, we'll put it back together and see what we get. Okay, so I got the capacitors installed. It wasn't as bad as I feared it was going to be, but I'm ready to try it out now. Whenever you do anything electrical or electronic in any unit you're working on, it's always advisable to try it on the dim bulb tester first. It's an ounce of prevention, pound of cure. It's an old saying, and there's a reason it got to be an old saying. So I've got it plugged in. Let's flip it on and see what we get. Okay, that looks good. Came out of protection. All right, all I have to do now, and by the way, spoiler alert, I did try it before I turned the camera on, and the bulb glowed a lot more brightly when the capacitors were completely discharged, because these have a lot more capacity than the ones that were in it. The ones that were in it were roughly half their value, so you're talking about an added 20,000 microfarads of filtering since we put new capacitors in here. Okay, so I've got it hooked up. Let's see what we get when we feed some signal in here. Okay, it's on. Out of protection. And I have nothing because, well, I don't know. That's why. Because I have the switch set wrong. I'm just feeding signal directly into the outputs. Okay, looks good. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, as promised, is pull the front off of this beast. Okay, yeah, that's all we're going to do today. So as always, I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I like giving back to the community that's given me so much. Thanks a lot, folks.